What happens when a Finnish studio waits 13 years to follow up on their story of a prolific writer fighting literal darkness with creativity? What happens when that same studio creates a bunch of first in class action games, experiments relentlessly with the mixing of mediums, and is unapologetically different from the rest of the industry at large? What happens when you give Sam Lake 13 years, a keyboard, and a bunch of money? Well, I'll tell you. You get roll a clip. When I tell you that Alan Wake 2 is unlike anything I've ever experienced, you might not believe me. You might look at the gameplay and think, that's Resident Evil. And yeah, it kinda is. You might find out that there are two playable protagonists and think, that's Resident Evil 2. Not exactly, but sure, I see your point. Maybe you see a few cutscenes and you say, oh, well, this looks kinda like Twin Peaks. And you'd be right, it is like those things, sure. But it is not those things. Alan Wake 2 is a media mixing, genre blending, mind bending spiral of action, exploration, puzzles, horror, and Finland. Yes, Finland. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, it is sublime. The atmosphere that these Finnish wizards have conjured up is utterly spellbinding. All at once, the direction, the graphical fidelity, the animations, the audio, the acting, each one of them wrap themselves around you so tightly and refuse to relent until the credits have rolled. Remedy have managed to seamlessly blend live action, rendered animation, and even visualizer music videos into one piece of what is, quite frankly, surprisingly coherent entertainment. There were times when I couldn't really tell if I was looking at an actor or a collection of polygons. At the very least, they kept me guessing, and that I find very impressive, especially when you consider that I played on the performance mode that favored frame rate over graphical fidelity. The art direction and facial and gesture animation is so strong, I might even say industry leading. The way that light peeks through the spaces between the trees, the clatter of leaves and branches on the paths winding down to the lake shore, the neon that bleeds across the wet pavements of a nightmare New York, or the ebb and flow of chromatic aberration at the edges of stuttering shadows. The way that characters emote, not just with their faces, but with their body language. This is all very impressive. Nowadays, the bar is pretty high. We expect excellence from these high budget games. We expect it in the close ups and the cutscenes, sure. But it seems like Remedy have used performance capture for every single character interaction in the game, and it really shows. Talking to a couple of witnesses in a diner booth, or the enthusiastic and ever enigmatic Koskela brothers standing at the side of a flooded road, each conversation is as expressive and captivating as the last. This consistency and attention to detail is what really keeps that grip so firm. This is how the game engrosses you, keeps you engaged. And not only that, the game dares to entertain you, it dares to make you laugh. And considering that this game is a horror game, that's quite surprising. It would be very easy to just lock you into that state of fear and dread and refuse to let you go. But Remedy are quite happy for you to walk between worlds, and I'm very thankful for that. And it does so very often. In some games, you explore around for all of these extras, and what do you get? A little bit of XP, maybe you get to tick off a box. But I genuinely enjoyed watching the ads for the truly unmanageable number of business ventures that the Koskela brothers have undertaken, or listening to Pat's Radio Hour and uncovering the mystery of Emily Davis of Davis Family Moose Jerky. This game is special. In some games, you pick up an audio log and you hope to God that you can listen to it whilst you're still walking around. Because, yeah, sure, it's interesting, but it's not interesting enough for me to stop what I'm doing and just listen. But in my 30 plus hours of gameplay, I never once had that issue. I was so invested in everything, every single morsel of detail that I could pick up. I wanted to know what had happened to Emily Davis of Davis Family Moose Jerky. In 5 minutes of gameplay in Alan Wake 2, I might be scared out of my skin by a jump scare, kill a group of creatures that crawled out from deep within an endlessly dark lake, solve a nursery rhyme, more on that later, and then stop and listen to a radio show by a picnic table. And it all just works. Most of the time.
Winners of the last year's trophy for Best Deer Fest float featuring an animal that is not deer.
That very team. And you're gonna get a kick out of our latest float designs. We've done it all. Deerfest floats, restaurant floats, floats shaped like things we can't show on television.
The success that Remedy have found here with mixed media cannot be understated. To flick back and forth so flippantly and frequently is a bold gamble that really pays off, and I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see the rest of the industry take note, especially as the gap between rendered and photo continues to narrow. Now, am I saying that I want every game to have live action elements in it? No, not every game needs that, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little interested. And sure, the dock of Bright Falls looks beautiful during and well after sunset. Watery is full of intricate and well-crafted landmarks to compel you to search every square meter of it, and Cauldron Lake is thick with dread. But all this atmosphere is not just in your eyes, it's in your ears.
A deputy was supposed to be here to show us to the crime scene. There's the car, so where's the deputy?
Eaten by a bear?
The ambient sounds of the forest that surrounds Cauldron Lake, or the unnerving sound of distant tunes in a theme park, or conversations between birds and a lonely woman in a park. It all helps to transport you to this wacky town in the Pacific Northwest. But not only that, each pop of your pistol provides such feedback. And the squelch of ripped and scattered flesh as it finds its mark is so utterly satisfying. Then there's your flashlight, firing a beam of concentrated light that pulls the veil on the surrounding safety of a shadow is downright addictive. Or the sound of Alan's lamp as it sucks in and spits out light into the world. It has such a distinct quality to it. When I played Control, I remember finding glee in the feedback of all of the service weapons variations and hoping that the same effort would be given to the weapons of Alan and Saga. I can confirm that Remedy did not disappoint. Their sound design in all departments is nothing short of exemplary. The world of Alan Wake is just as beautiful to listen to as it is to look at.
The Mind Place. My version of the Mind Palace technique. To sift through clues and work the case. Building the Mind Place again for each case. Using each field office as a model in my head.
The UI is really quite creative, specifically Saga's Mind Place and Alan's Writer Room. Making the menus playable is such an act of genius. Having a place to walk around from menu to menu whilst also engrossing yourself in the mental processes of your characters is such a masterstroke. In addition to that, Remedy have had the foresight to understand that you might not want to do that. You might not want to walk slowly from menu to menu, so they give you the best of both worlds and stick a cherry on top of it. Jumping into one menu allows you to tab across to any of the other menus as you please. If you think that you want to walk from the caseboard to the profiling desk, but then you change your mind whilst you navigate around the room, a distant button prompt will present itself to allow you to jump wherever you like in each character's respective menu. It's perfect. It is actual magic. And if you're one of the UI designers that worked on it, I love you. Like actually love you. And you know, if you're free on the weekend and you like a guy that looks kind of half decent in a suit. Elsewhere though, I found it a little hit and miss. So let's talk about the inventory management. I have to be honest, there were more than a few times that I really wished for the Resident Evil auto sort function, especially when the positioning of your items actually matters. Say you need 3 squares to pick up a new pump action shotgun that you've just derailed the pace of the game's final hours to seek out, and you got 6 squares, but you still can't pick it up. What you really need It's 3 squares in a row. That might not sound like a big deal, but it's not very fun, and this was actually the only time in the game that I personally had to worry about the feature. But I can imagine it could have been worse if I didn't shove so many arrows into my shoebox. Why are you giving me so many arrows anyway? I mean, according to the system that you set up, because I can pick them back up, you should really be giving me less arrows. Now, I know it's not the end of the world, but it's a bit much, alright? Look at the state of my bloody shoebox. Going through the inventory felt a little bit clunky too. I felt like I should have been able to just press a button or hold a button to interact with my items rather than having to press and then scroll through a menu every time. What I mean is, just let me hold a button to drop an item, don't make me search through a menu. Just let me press a button to equip an item. Don't make me press a button to access a menu that I then have to scroll through and then select equipped. Just a few too many steps for what should really be simple actions. I found the quick slot function a little bit off as well. Not terrible by any means, definitely didn't ruin the game for me, but I do feel like a few screws could have been tightened up there. First, I get that if you're using pictures of the item to promote clarity to the player, if it's literally a picture of the thing, there's no way that they're going to get confused about if it's actually the thing or not. But I think icons are the way to go. I feel like it brings a sense of visual cohesion to the design. But I also understand that that's really more of a personal preference, so I'll let it slide. There were also multiple times when I pressed on the D-pad to select my pistol, but I already had my pistol out, forgot about that, suppose that's my bad, but then I end up in the sawn-off shotgun section, and I didn't really want to use that, but it's not the end of the world, I just think that could have been tightened up a little bit, it happened pretty frequently throughout my playthrough, okay? So when it comes to the core design, the inventory was really the only bit that I felt could have been tightened up properly. I mean, there were some issues with combat in the later game, but I'll get to that. On the whole, I think it's pretty solid. However, there's quite a lot of bugs. From the very get-go, there's a kind of little jitter when the game transitions from cinematic to gameplay. I found that you could kind of fix this by waiting just an extra second to really make sure that the idle animation was well and truly in place before moving your character. But it just feels like something I shouldn't have to do, and it's a shame because the game puts in so much effort to create this atmosphere for you. Especially in the opening moments of the game when Nightingale crawls out from Cauldron Lake in the middle of the night. I'm already so invested. A character that has been absent for 13 years washes up naked on the shore of the dark place, and now I'm playing as him. That's a fantastic start. But then there's that little jitter to remind you that it's not real. This isn't an issue that's specific to Alan Wake 2, I've noticed it in plenty of other games, and if I had to guess, I mean, this is clearly beyond my real comprehension, but if I had to guess, it's probably something to do with the fact that you can't have a playable character model in a cutscene, because there's too much logic attached to this playable character model that means that the cutscene can't cut back and forth like it would like to without stuttering all over the place. So you need a cutscene character model. But then when the cutscene's over, you need to go back to the playable character model. And I'm guessing that we're running into some issues and some jitter and stutter as those animations, those idle animations, try to line up. But that's just a guess. Like I said, I don't really know what I'm talking about, okay? So if you do know, please let me know down below. Enlighten me. However, whilst we're on the subject of animation glitches, there's a few more I want to talk about. One was when you first go to Watery and you walk into Suomi Hall and there's Artie singing, which is an awesome moment that really helps to cement both Control and Alan Wake in the same world or universe or whatever it is. But when I come back, he's still singing, but now he's not moving, which sucked because this is a cool moment, and my first experience was hurt by an animation glitch. Just a bit unfortunate. Then there was an issue with fighting Scratch on the beach of Cauldron Lake. This is part animation issue and part event sequencing issue. So I need to point these big lights at this cage that's going to trap Scratch. Don't know why we didn't just set them up facing that way in the first place. I get it, we're a little bit strapped for time, we're under pressure, but boys and girls, this really feels like a bit of an essential ingredient in the recipe. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, I'm turning these things and I'm pretty sure one of them turns too far, like past the point of no return. So, I'm pointing the light at the cage, but I'm not pointing it in the way that the game wants me to. But I don't know that yet. So I do the other light and lure Scratchy into the cage with his bejeweled Calavera Knight's jacket. Estevez and Casey hit the lights and the boy is just standing there, like he's got a vision or something. Needless to say, I had to restart that one. Bit of a shame to have that encounter ruined by a bit of a glitch, you know. The game does so much to create this atmosphere, and that atmosphere is still there. The momentum of the story is still there. And I mean, it kind of says something that I still enjoyed it, even though this happened. I just feel like that whole experience is kind of marred by that slight glitch. You know what I mean? It's just a little bit annoying. That's what I'm saying. But there really were quite a lot of bugs. And at the risk of harping on it for too long and sounding too negative, I'm going to rapid fire a few of them right now. Firstly, some of the enemies that I'm killing are still making noises when they're dead.
Stories! Mask!
There's also this weird specular lighting issue. Look, it's not the end of the world, right? But that's kind of like in my face. That's kind of hard to ignore that. Do you know what I'm saying? And sometimes I couldn't actually reload my gun. Didn't matter how many times I pressed square to reload. Wouldn't let me do it. I actually had to empty the clip, fire off all my rounds until I completely ran out, then try to fire again, and that would trigger an automatic reload animation. Sometimes I wouldn't be able to throw a canister, or even worse, I would throw it, but then it would disappear. While I say disappear, it only actually disappeared once, but on several other occasions, the thing's bouncing away. It is a canister of flammable gas. Why is it made out of rubber? Look, I'm expecting a little bit of a clank and a roll, right? The idea that where I throw it might not necessarily be where it's going to end up. That's good gameplay design. Holds me accountable, keeps me in the loop, keeps me interested and invested. That's cool. But it shouldn't be bouncing off the enemy and ending up on a shelf behind me, should it? That's kind of ridiculous. Let's be honest with ourselves, all right? Then, I want to talk about the map. Oh my god, the map. Look, I know this isn't going to be everyone's experience, okay? And I know I'm sounding a bit negative, and I did like the game. But this was certainly my experience. From the very get-go, my map had Alice's photos in the shoebox of the basement of the TV studio. But obviously, because that isn't something that turns up until around the latter third of the game, I'm searching around for a good 10 minutes before I give up. It really upset the flow of gameplay in Alan's opening section. Then there are these yellow investigation markers in watery from the murder float. Didn't matter that I'd already completed that section of the game hours ago, they're still there. Again, disrupting the flow of gameplay. There's also this yellow dot that will appear on the map to show you where your next objective is. When I was in the dark place, I had one pop up for no reason. Nothing would happen when I reached it, and luckily by this point in the game, I'd already encountered a bunch of map glitches, so I didn't really pay too much attention to it. When I actually get to it, Alan did mention that there was no sign of Casey, because this is where he had previously been murdered, so I can see the connection. But the dot just stayed there, even as I ran towards the actual true objective of the chapter. Finally, there were a couple of times I was actually forced to restart the game because I wasn't able to back out of things that I'd interacted with. The first was the suitcase just outside the Poets Theatre, which made me lose about 20 minutes of gameplay. Not the end of the world, I know, but I'd grabbed a couple words of power and they were kind of on the way, and then before that I got a couple of echoes as well, so having to do all that again was a bit annoying. Then there was the murder site of Mulligan and Thornton. Tried to interact with a poem, got stuck in that one. I got stuck whilst looking at the poem on the wall. Luckily, the checkpoint is literally just prior to interacting with it, so I didn't really have to replay anything. But it's just another thing to rip me out of the immersion. Okay, moan over. On the whole, the game is actually fantastically presented. There's just quite a few bugs. Not enough to completely ruin the game for me. Don't get that impression from me, please don't. But definitely enough to give me a bit of grief, alright? But now that the moan's over, why don't we talk about some gameplay? At its very core, the loop of Alan Wake 2, pun intended, is solid. Exploring the eerie woods, hearing the offhand, nonsensical, out of time and out of place remarks of the Taken or the Shadows before opening fire and searching for the ever satisfying series of headshots. Then, when the gunfire and rambling has ceased, you solve a puzzle or two and rinse and repeat. This isn't anything new either. There's a whole bunch of games that have you doing a bit of fighting, a bit of exploring, then a bit of fighting, and so on and so on. But Alan Wake 2 is just so satisfying. Carving into the enemy with this intense beam of your flashlight, dodging at the right moment, pulling the trigger to initiate sounds that feel so heavy. I know I said it earlier, but the sound design and the animation give such feedback that makes each encounter so much more fun. The dodging mechanic, whilst very simple, adds enough depth to each fight to keep you on your toes. It's more than just shooting. If you miss and then they close the distance, there's now a new type of tension as you get ready to dodge, for the last chance to save yourself from some damage. I just want to take the time to say that if you out there, are making a game with combat in it, pretty much any style of combat, okay? I'm not being picky here. Let me dodge. Let me dodge, for goodness sake. Doesn't have to be a specific kind of dodge, you know? It can be a dive roll, it can be a bob and a weave, it can be a slide, whatever you want, all right? Just give me the ability to feel like my character isn't a complete dunce, all right? The world is closing in. Oh, I'm going to stand still. It don't make any sense to me, okay? Just give me a dodge, please. The whole flashlight mechanic is fun. It can be a little bit frustrating that their darkness shields will regenerate, not so much in the early game, but when they start giving you 3 to 4 enemies and some of them split into 2 and then they start zipping all over the place, it just gets a bit annoying, especially when you're in the woods and there's all these trees for them to hide behind. It makes you really rely on your ears to pinpoint where they're coming from, which is actually pretty fun. But searching for the guy whose shield you've just busted, whilst also trying to avoid the guy lumbering towards you, then finally seeing him zip off again, all the while you're just dodging axes being flung at you, it didn't really feel like the game was trying to challenge me in those moments. It was just a bit more annoying than anything. But luckily, that was only really in the last couple of hours of gameplay as Saga. And that's probably because I was really trying to find every single collectible. I was exploring every single square inch of the map. So if I had stuck to the golden path, I don't really think this would have been an issue for everyone, which is why I don't think this is a very common issue. I didn't find the same problem when playing as Alan though, and that is 100% because of the arenas that you fight in. They're far more confined. You're almost always indoors or on a rooftop where there are plenty of funnel points. There's never really an area so open as the Forest of Bright Falls. It's mostly tight corridors. Even when you're out on the streets of Nightmare New York, there are less obstacles in the way. If an enemy somehow ends up behind a car, I'm still clear to aim for a headshot. There are crowd control items that make the whole issue a little easier, but sometimes I found that things just didn't work as I wanted them to. I've already spoken about the canisters, but there are also single-use flares for Saga and a flare gun for Alan that wouldn't explode in the way that you kind of expected them to. Maybe you actually need to hit the Taken for the whole explosion effect. That could be my bad, but there are also a few occasions when I tried to be clever and shoot a tree to get everyone in the radius, and it didn't really pan out the way that I hoped. It took a lot of the satisfaction and reliability away from those weapons. Now that I'm thinking about it, flares don't actually explode in real life, do they? So, that one's on me. I'll take that one. Oopsie doopsie, I goofed, my bad. But again, I don't want to sound too negative, okay? Because usually, I'm not a big fan of the whole you got to shoot them in the head 6 times thing and then maybe they'll go down. Usually, I find that one's enough, puts me right to bed, okay? But I actually quite like it here. I find it quite fun. Again, because of that solid visual and audio feedback. I love that the pistol pops, the shotgun crashes, and the rifle cracks through the air. Made the weapons feel distinct. Then there's the charge spots, the red glowing bits on the Taken. I like those. I found it a bit rude when they were on the enemy's back, but I get it's to encourage you to take a few more risks and save your ammo, and while I didn't find that all that very necessary in normal mode, I reckon that this makes for some extra tense gameplay playing on hard or nightmare mode, where each round really counts. While there isn't this massive variety in enemies, I do feel like Remedy have found a pretty simple and elegant solution to make it feel like there's a variety, and that is the dual character narrative. Because the enemies of Saga and Alan both play pretty similarly, but they feel quite different. All the enemies have their darkness shield, then you start shooting and you don't stop until they're dead. But the enemies in the dark place aren't always hostile. They keep you guessing. Do you want to take your chances and try and slip by the enemies? Because some of them will fade away when you get too close, and others might not notice you at all if you turn your flashlight off. Quick note to the developer, I know that you leave a little bit of a hint and you say, hey, if you turn that flashlight off, you might be able to sneak past them. Now I get it. I could do that. But the problem is, you made them too bloody scary, all right? They're always whispering stuff in my ear, jittering and jumping out at me. They're too scary, okay? I got to make sure that I'm ready. My flashlight's poised. I'm ready to go. I'm ready for the fight, okay? I can't do this. However, I do see that this would be a very useful mechanic in harder modes where resources are far more scarce. You have to really make sure that every round counts. So don't go changing anything just yet. I think you might be onto a winner there. So my point is, combat would probably be a little bit more boring if not for this dual character narrative. But that's not me saying that Remedy have entertained us with cheap tricks. I'm not saying that at all. I think that this is the result of very clearly intentional design. I really appreciate it. And not only that, doing it this way probably meant that your staff didn't have to stay late for hours on end to make sure that they had a variety of enemies. All I'm saying is that when it comes time for the next game, maybe we've got to bump those numbers up a little bit, okay? Those are rookie numbers. But again, I'm just talking out loud, all right? I understand that Remedy already have thought about this. I'm just talking out loud. Just giving my 2 cents, okay? Having said that, I've got to have another bit of a moan. I know I said I was done moaning. I'm last one, okay? I've got to talk about the boss fights.
The wave crashed on the far side of the mirror. I brought you the Heart Witch. Show me the terror.
I felt like they were a bit of a letdown and not entirely necessary. So, if I'm remembering correctly, as Saga, you fight Nightingale, Mulligan and Thornton, Cynthia Weaver, and finally Scratch. As Alan, you don't actually have any boss fights. You usually just run away from Scratch or the Dark Presence, which I think is a good choice. It makes sense in the context of the story and creates a tense and memorable set piece each time that it ravages the surroundings in a desperate attempt to kill the only other that is powerful enough to bend and mold the Dark Place to its will. I liked it. I don't really feel that they needed to change that. But with Saga, they just ended up feeling so misguided. For a game that is oozing such style and creativity, it felt so strange to just resort to shooting the bosses until they were dead. The arenas, the overlaps that you fight them in, I think they're great and they really fit with the theme of the game. You run through this loop, uncovering a little more each time the environment changing a little more. I really love that. But then it just ends in a shootout and it all feels so gamey. You know what I mean? I thought Nightingale's boss fight was actually okay. It was early on in the game and it felt like his moveset was just really an extension of the regular Taken that you encounter in the game. I saw it as a first time to really test my skills within the core gameplay systems. With Mulligan and Thornton, that's when I really started to notice it. Thornton is zipping all around the arena while she dodges rifle fire, and then Mulligan is just lumbering towards you. If I'm being honest, I don't really know how you could have solved this, but if we're thinking thematically or narratively, maybe you could have had Thornton and Mulligan, because they're seen as like dolts in the games world, maybe they could have killed each other and you do something with that, okay? I'm just thinking out loud again, all right? You might be thinking, this guy's talking a bunch of baloney. I love these boss fights. That's cool. This is just my opinion, all right? I'd love to hear about yours. Please let me know. I want to hear it. Then there's Cynthia Weaver. I think that the lead up to this was actually really entertaining, if a little sad. Having Cynthia hold out for so long just to be dragged under made me feel really sorry for her. Then she's jumping out at you all the time and you forget all about that very quickly and you just want to dome her. Hearing the splashes in the water behind you was such a nice touch and really put me on edge for a while. Finally, you end up in this big arena. It makes you feel like there's going to be this real battle. She's got all these abilities, but in the end, she just ragdolls after a little firepower. Would have been nice to do something that really savors the moment with Cynthia's character. Could have done something involving all those lights at the dam that she used to hide out in. Could have been quite dark and poetic. Again, just an idea, a very underdeveloped idea. After all that build up in the wellness center and the nursing home, it just felt a little lackluster, that's all. Then there's the initial encounter with Scratch. I quite like this one. It acknowledged that you can't just shoot him to death like the others, so the process is a little more involved by turning those powerful lights on. I enjoyed it. And finally, there's the big one. On the shores of Cauldron Lake, Tor and Odin are rocking out on the top of their nursing home van to open a portal to the Dark Place. What a concept! Truly sick. But then we're dropping loads of boxes of ammo on the beach to stop the endless waves of Taken, and that just all felt a bit bleh, you know? I feel like you could have had some real fun with this one. All of those lights that you set up, maybe you have to choose which ones you want to turn on and off to fit with the whole lack of power idea. And instead of you running back and forth to do it, which would be quite annoying, let Casey and Estevez do it. Really create a sense of teamwork in these final moments. Then with Tor and Odin, you could have done some really wacky stuff like killing the Taken with lightning from the guitar or drum solos that create insane waves that crash into the lake, sending the Taken back where they came from. And doing all of this at specific times in the song in order to stay true to the art. Or something like that. I just remember being on that beach, fighting the horde and thinking, I got two rockstar pensioners standing on top of this van that they have stolen from their nursing home, fighting literal darkness with the power of rock and roll. Why doesn't this feel cooler? And don't get me wrong, when they first started playing, when they first started strumming and slamming on the drums, I had such a big smile on my face. I love this. I enjoyed it. But then all those boxes started falling down. And I was like, okay. Song's pretty sick though. When Scratch finally shows up, we're spinning lights very slowly, which I get is to add tension, but it didn't really do that. It just ended up feeling quite cumbersome. To sum them up, mechanically, they're quite shallow, but the spectacle of them is actually fantastic. It's so good. And it's quite a credit to Remedy. If I can play through these boss fights, moan so much about them, but at the end, still say I enjoyed myself. So, I think I am actually done with all the moaning now. So, why don't I do a bit of gushing? It's time to talk about the exploration.
I need to open the safe. What's the combination?
People hate the puzzles, Ilmo. Why not just use keys? People love the puzzles, Yaku. Only very smart people can think up good puzzles. Just look around and you will find the answer. Dedicated staff will be rewarded.
Alan Wake 2 is exceptional in this department. I know. Who would have thought that making your puzzles a little bit challenging, making sure that players actually have to use their noggin to solve them, would be fun? Yes, okay, I know. Everyone's been saying that since the beginning of time, but kids keep getting stupider. So what do you want them to do? Okay, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place here. All I'm saying is thank you to the puzzle designers at Remedy for trusting that I would have the wherewithal to work them out. I actually enjoyed doing a bit of working out on my whiteboard. I liked searching the environment for clues on book spines and keys to decrypt. It was fun and not just another box to tick to say that you've done it. And not only that, they even let you kind of cheat them a little bit. I mean, most of the time, when I'm looking at these padlocks and I'm spinning the dials around, I think, well, I got 2 out of 3. In real life, I'd probably just spin this last one until it unlocked. And you know what? Most of the time, that was actually quicker. That's good design. That's really good design. You got to understand there's such a fine line between challenging your player and frustrating them so much that they put down the controller and never come back. I mean, did you know that most people that buy games don't ever finish them? Right? So giving them the ability to solve most of that puzzle, feel like they could have finished the puzzle, and then still cheat it and break the puzzle a little bit is such great intentional design. And not only are these puzzles fun, they are narratively fulfilling too. I enjoyed opening each cult stash to learn more about how they communicated. Realizing that these guys just sound like normal guys was kind of hilarious to me. Telling me that that one dude missed his family pizza night because it took him too long to solve this puzzle is fun. That's bloody fun. Solving each nursery rhyme and learning even more about the FBC whilst you do it had me on such a fishhook. I can't tell you how much I love reading the stuff about this organization that they keep leaving behind. I'm one of the guys that found every single document, tape, video, you name it, in Control. I could not get enough of it. Not to mention that it ends in a way that feels cool too, like you get the better of someone who was trying to get the better of you, whilst also learning a bit more about the power of the lake and the incompetence of the ever overstretched FBC. Plus, you get a cute little charm when you do each one of them, and I love that. I enjoyed opening each Alex Casey lunchbox too, and ultimately finding Rose at the helm of the whole operation. That was great. Reading the positive notes of affirmation or the fan fiction was such good fun. And to top it off, you get to upgrade your equipment as well. I really liked how the manuscript pages work. The idea that Alan has written something into the story to give Saga this supernatural advantage. That's cool. I don't get why Rose had to rip them all up, but I think there's probably a reason for that that might be explained in the next game, given that Alan apparently exists in multiple timelines and has no recollection of ever talking to Rose or asking her to leave help around Bright Falls for the hero. I do not envy the task that Sam Lake has set up for himself. I even enjoyed the lesser stuff that didn't impact the gameplay, like the campaign slogans, because I was really invested in finding out who this mayor was. And when you get to find out, I gotta admit, it tickled me a little bit. Especially because I was so invested through Pat Main's radio show. When you listen to Pat Main's radio show, he has Jim Figmore on, and he really hates the current mayor and wants to run for mayor himself. He accuses the current mayor of killing cats. Then, while I'm playing through the rest of the game, I notice all these missing cats and dogs posters, and I'm thinking, oh damn, is the mayor actually killing cats? Then it turns out to be a bloody dog, which I thought was so much fun, especially when you remember that this guy running for mayor just hates this dog. But I'm still left wondering, where are all the cats and dogs? I know I've already touched on Pat's Radio Hour, but if you've played the game and missed out on it, just give it a go. I absolutely loved it. It was such a weird little treat each time I found a working radio, despite how sad it becomes when you start to realize that Pat might not be so confused just because his life is being overwritten. You might have noticed that I've not talked about Alan too much when talking about these collectibles. Well, he has the words of power, which I think are fun to look for and help you upgrade yourself, but they didn't really add anything beyond that for me. The echoes of Alex Casey are pretty stylish and become quite engaging in the later game as you start to see the hard boiled Alex Casey break down under the crushing weight of a reality that is ever shifting. There is another one that I found most enjoyable. I don't know if you'd technically consider it a collectible, but I did enjoy it, and that is Tim Breaker. I looked forward to running into him, seeing what more he'd managed to uncover about the dark place and wall and door. He'd always have a map for you with a bunch of markings, so I liked the guy. When I list it all out like that, it kind of makes it sound like Remedy put a lot more effort into the exploration of Saga's sections than they do in Alan's, which I think is true, but it's not really a fair statement, especially when you consider the mechanic of the plot board and Alan's angel lamp. Being able to change the level layout and design at will is a big risk from a gameplay design perspective, and it's a real puzzle on its own just to solve each location and find the murder site for Alan. The ones that I really enjoyed were the Ocean View Hotel and the Poets Cinema. I found myself trying different combinations that I knew were wrong just because I wanted to see how they panned out. I know the designers at Remedy put a lot of effort into these sections, and I just want to say that it hasn't gone unnoticed. I really appreciate just how much effort you put into this, even though those subway tunnels made me shake in my little booties. Speaking of the mechanics in the writer's room, on the inverse, you've got Saga's Mind Place. Now, it is a bit of a nothing mechanic, but I really enjoyed it. I say a nothing mechanic because you get all of these cards to put on the board, but each one of them can only go in one correct place. You also don't really need to deduct everything. Sometimes you can get by just by playing the game. Not all the time, but sometimes. Having said that, I actually really enjoyed it, and I would love to see it return. I liked hearing all the things that Saga would add after placing each card down. I liked reading her notes, it helped me feel closer to her. I liked the feeling of having some sort of a checklist with everything that's going on in the game. It was fun to fill it all out. The profiling was a cool mechanic, and I loved the stylized visuals of them and feeling like a detective on the hunt for the truth. Although, I do wonder how they're going to handle it in the next game. After Saga finds out that she has actual powers, it's not just some intuition, and she feels much more powerful by the end of the game. In short, I loved engaging with the mechanics in Saga's Mind Place and Alan's Writer's Room. So, I think that about covers the gameplay, which means it's probably time to start talking about the winding spiral that is the story. The story of Alan Wake 2 is this complex weaving of alternative realities, timelines, murder, and elements of the supernatural. And somehow, it all just works. And if I'm being honest, I could go on forever about the incredible standout moments in this story. I could go into detail about the musical that Alan writes in an attempt to throw everything that he's got at the dark place to finally escape it. Or I could talk about the Cult of the Tree's assault on the Elderwood Palace Lodge in their hunt for the writer that dared to crawl back out of the lake. Or the ever-spiraling insanity of the lost poet Thomas Zane. Or the 10 minutes of Scandinavian cinema I stood and watched in a dark theatre that I'd previously dreaded to return to. Or the well with a history of murder in which Saga descends. Or the pond she submerges herself in chasing after her drunk and belligerent grandfather. Or I could go on about how that same grandfather and his brother play rock and roll on top of their stolen nursing home van to open a portal to the hell that is the dark place. There's so much spectacle to talk about, and for a while, I thought that's all that Alan Wake was. Spectacle. However, as I progressed through the game, I found depth, and I found that depth in its characters. The brazen stylings of the Koskela brothers, the cute and charming flirts and conversations held by the inhabitants of the Valhalla nursing home, the wide-eyed and almost unnerving enthusiasm of Rose Marigold, the comfort of Tim Breaker humming Night Springs in a hopeless place, a new and quite friendly face in Agent Kieran Estevez who can shed some light on the situation, the inaudible babblings of the enigma that is Ati, the ramblings of the ever more insane Thomas Zane, the disconcerting smile of Warlin Dorr, the talk show host that isn't really a talk show host, the brooding but clearly caring seasoned agent Alex Casey, the drunken boisterousness of the Anderson brothers disguising the loving and caring nature that they hide underneath. All of them, and I'm sure a few more that I've missed, elevate our story by elevating our main characters, Saga Anderson and the titular Alan Wake. Despite being the newcomer, Saga manages to pull you in quite effectively, and for a while, I was confused at how she'd done it. While the story certainly challenges Saga, there isn't a moment where it feels like she is truly tested, even though she goes through quite the ordeal. Her investigation in Bright Falls leads her down a path of discovery, one that, at first, seems purely fictional. The power of the lake and the writer trapped within it warps the minds of the small town inhabitants, but not her. She resists and knows the truth. Her family are safe at home on the couch watching the newest episode of Night Springs. Slowly but surely, the story bears its fangs to prove that it is very real, and no one is safe from the click and clack of the typewriter's keys. All the names are on the board, and anyone can be scratched out. Even with this peril, Saga always seems somewhat calm and collected. Unnerved and worried, absolutely, but there's never a moment where she really loses it, never shows a scowl on her face. That's what initially made me think that I hadn't had a chance to connect with her very much. But when she was thrown into the lake, trapped in her own mind place, I realized that I did care for her. Subtly, throughout the entire game, I've been given insight into Saga and her inner workings. Through the questions that she asks in profiling sessions, her inner narrative as she tries to make sense of the situation on her caseboard, or the simple and self-affirming quips that she throws out after dealing with groups of the Taken. She is quiet and calm and measured. She is already strong, and I found that quite refreshing. Now, she's not invincible by any measure, but her mind is often still, ready to address any ripple on the surface. When Saga is trapped in her mind place, that's when we finally see those doubts that she's been hiding. She's unsure if she's a bad mother for focusing so much on her work, a bad agent for missing the clues about Scratch and the cult of the tree, losing Casey to Scratch, making her feel even worse of a mother for leaving her child only to fumble the task at hand and lose everything. But once again, her strength shows itself, helps her to remember that she is good at what she does, that Casey values her and knows the dangers of their work, that she is a good mother. Considering the strength that Saga has shown throughout the game, it kind of made sense to me that she would be able to save herself. She would be able to be her own hero, be the hero that Alan has written her to be. Alan is not quite the same though. From the get-go, Alan is a strong presence in the story, not because his name is in the title, but because he's writing the story that we're playing. Not only that, it is quite clearly driving him mad. Each time he returns to that lonely desk in his writer's room, the yellow eyes at his back and an old typewriter at his front, he sinks a little deeper, feels a little more hopeless. If not for the intervention of those around him, the persistent cartography and inquiry of Tim Breaker, the meddling surface investigations of Saga Anderson, the clues and guidance left by a loved one that refuses to leave him behind, he would be none the wiser, thrown closer to the center of the spiral. But they do intervene, and he does persist, and he meddles, and he follows, and he finally accepts this guiding hand that pulls him out from the bottom of this pit which he has been trapped in for 13 years. When you compare this Alan that escapes the dark place to the one that ultimately surrendered himself to it all those years ago, they are two very different men. One is selfish and proud. He is the famed writer, too afraid to falter for fear of what others might think, too afraid to accept help because the success must be his own. It must be his achievement. He has to be the hero, so he doesn't try, because if you never try, you can never fail. But it's this fear that ultimately pulls him to Bright Falls. If not for his hesitation, Alice would never have felt the need to coax him into traveling, into speaking with the misguided and now misshapen and dead Dr. Hartman. Alan's fear was truly his undoing. This new Alan, though, the one with many more years under his eyes, he understands the importance of a helping hand. Together, Saga and he write the ending of this lingering horror story. That is what the Dark Place is, a manifestation of doubt and incredulity in oneself. All the terrible things we might say, the unkind and uncaring words that put us down and drive us further away from our desires, from our full potential. It is no coincidence that the creative are able to harness the unruly power of the Dark Place. They are the ones that most often lack confidence in themselves, the ones who give up before they ever truly begin. It is only when he is forced to write out of necessity that he finally escapes. All that writing, the pages upon pages to create story after story, honing his craft slightly better with each iteration. The final product all the better for it. An ending that is true, an ending that doesn't cut corners, an ending that faces the hardships that must come with our victories. Alan escapes because he accepts the terrible thoughts, the dark presence that scratches inside his head. He pushes through it so that he might no longer be afraid of it, so that he might use it to create. And from the darkness peeks a guiding hand that will pull us into the light. In the end, Alan Wake 2 far and away exceeded my expectations. I expected to enjoy it, sure, but I'd never expected that it would be a new favorite of mine. With gameplay that provides such satisfying visual and audio feedback, with exploration that rewards you at every turn for really discovering all that it hides. A soundtrack that I'm sure, if you're anything like me, you'll be humming for quite some time to come. Characters that you'll fall in love with, and a story that you can learn from, if you wish to. Considering that you've made it this far, I'm going to assume that you too have played the game. And if so, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Please put something down below. Let's start a conversation about it. I'd really enjoy that. But I got one more favor to ask you before you leave. No, it's not that you like and subscribe, though if you're in the mood, that would be nice. Much appreciated. Thank you. No, it's share this game. Tell people about this game, all right? Play it. Tell people how much you enjoyed it. I think the sheer amount of effort and creativity and style that's been put into this game deserves to be enjoyed and played by as many as possible. So if you could do that, I'd really enjoy it. I think Remedy deserve it. So that about cuts it, guys. I think we're done. Just about. I've got another short story. Links down below. It's about World War One and ghosts and dead things coming back to life. Maybe that tickles your fancy. Link down below. Give it a read. And the next game is going to be Dead Space. All right. I'll see you next time. But in the meantime, be good.